afternoon. Bharat was just telling me that he liked this title. I think it has the benefit of being descriptive. What we forgot to do was put the name of the, I'm Tarun Khanna, and I'm a professor here. One of my students, Siddhant, and I, and a third student at MIT, founded a company called JanaCare a few years ago. And to appreciate why we did this, it might help to realize these numbers are a bit contested, but order of magnitude, about 1.5 billion to 2 billion people out of 7 in the world suffer from diabetes, pre-diabetes, or some complication associated with it. Of that rather large percentage of humanity, more than 90% of them never get tested, let alone treated. And it's a chronic disease, and the burden of disease, not only in rich countries, but in poor countries because of our sedentary lifestyles, is increasing as we speak. So it's probably one of the single biggest killers of all of us. So we set out to try to come up with some new technology that would make it easier to be tested. And that has, in Andre's term, started to move in the direction of becoming a bit of a platform. So all I want to do in 5 or 6 minutes is give you a flavor, show you some pictures of what we are up to, and show you some data for where we think that this can go, and hope to interest you in a bit of a conversation. To do this, we thought that we would ask the question, how do we map the prevalence of diabetes in a city? This company has its engineering in Bangalore, in India, in southern India. That happens to be the tech center for India. It also happens to be the center of the southern part of the country, which has a very high incidence of diabetes. The labs for the company are about 1 mile away from here, near the BU area. This is just a flavor. So what happens to you, this is an oversimplification. I see some doctors in the room, so you'll pardon my inaccuracy here. You can either you can suffer from pre-diabetes or diabetes, and I said more than 90% of you would not know that that's the case until quite late. Those are the testing frequencies at the bottom. You might be annually tested for something called an HbA1c. Think of it as an integral of your blood sugar levels over a few months, 3 months, a moving average, if you will. You might be tested in a community center or a clinic in the first 2 boxes. Later on, your predisposition to heart disease goes up. Currently, you would be tested weekly for those complications, and later on, you would have renal failure. Your kidneys would fail, and so on and so forth. And there are many other things that would happen as a result of all this. You can see the frequency down there, and you can see the ideal monitoring frequency and location. All I'm going to talk about is diabetes and pre-diabetes for now. This is Bangalore, city of 8 million people, about a 16% incidence of diabetes, a guess. Global average maybe 7, 8, 9%, depending on how you count it. Incidence in southern India is probably close to 20%, so this is representative of that part of the country. And this is a typical clinic that you would see if you had some degree of modest affluence and you had some degree of access, you'd be able to walk into a clinic like this and get tested. 99% of you wouldn't even do that. So most of the population in the world doesn't even have access to places like this. Further, what happens is samples get collected all over the city and brought into these very informal shantytown-looking sort of setups. So the idea that you can reverse engineer and get some paper trail of exactly what sample came from where or get any data on this is, it's not going to happen. So the question we ask is, what if we had thousands of connected diagnostic devices spread across a city like this? What could we do with it? And by the way, all this applies in Boston as well. I'm just using this as an extreme example, right? So here's a device. Our device is basically just that little doohickey on that plastic thing up there, which we've developed. Connects to any smartphone in the world. The device itself costs a few tens of dollars, right? And what it does is it measures things that conventional glucometers and so on would test at CVS, where you can pick it up for 30 or 40 bucks. But it also does something called the HbA1c instantly. So currently, to get an HbA1c, which is this moving average of your average degree of diabetes, if you will, over the last few months, you would need to go into a mainstream clinic. So if I went into the Harvard Clinic and got tested for A1c, typically I'd find a result 2 days later, and it would cost a lot of money. We can do that instantly on any smartphone in the world for cents on the dollar. So we think it's a bit of a game changer for one of the biggest killers in the world. This is just a set of tests that we do, and this is the comment that I was making, that we're moving in the direction of being a platform for other kinds of tests. The prices out here are sort of a little bit worth focusing on. Let's pick one. So you look at the one in the middle, blood glucose. That's very common. Less than 10 cents. That's what you would pay even if you went to CVS. The HbA1c, fully loaded cost today, I don't know, must be a couple $100 at least in this country, if not more. Not to mention not being able to do it at all for most people, because you have to, again, go to a clinic or a hospital or something like that, and so on and so forth. The device itself, we would sell for, a sort of a platform version of the device. I don't have a picture of it, which would be something that sat in somebody's clinic. We would sell maybe for $100, $150. The equivalent device to replicate all the tests would cost $5,000 in this country at least. So we're talking about 2 orders of magnitude lowering of costs, instant access on any smartphone anywhere in the world. That's just where the company is: Boston, Bangalore, Singapore. We currently sell the device in Southeast Asia, little bits and pieces of Africa, Singapore, and India. And it's approved for sale in Europe and going through FDA here. This is just a picture of an informal clinic where someone is using our device. You can just see it still requires a finger stick blood sample, and then a phone. In a hospital setting, again in Bangalore, very quick, very simple, and you get a printed report of all your tests instantly. Again, something like this would take a couple of days to get in a conventional health setting, even in this country. So as an example, one nurse with one phone, with one little plastic doohickey attached to it, which we make, could, even if he or she saw 5 patients a day, 100 patients a month, or 20 working days, and you multiply that by 100 clinics, you could get 10,000 data points. So I'll show you what 10,000 data points look like in the city of Bangalore. Just an illustrative example. On the left, or the upper left, are A1C levels. That's that moving average indicator of diabetes, if you will. Think of green as normal, yellow as danger zone, and red as bad news. So you can see the incidence of diabetes. Now, what's interesting is the part in the center with a lot of green is Bangalore's approximation of Silicon Valley. That's where the startup enterprise is. It has a few more parks. It's still horribly crowded. So if you and I went there, we would say that this is very crowded and congested. But the real congested area of Bangalore is the place where you see all the reds clustered just above it on the left. So what can we learn from these correlations? Very, very simple correlations. Remember, just 1,000 data points, but we're generating data at the rate of hundreds of thousands of data points every day. This is what you see: a very strong positive correlation between parks and open spaces and A1C outcomes. High SES is socioeconomic status, so rich people tend to have more diabetes, are correlated with more diabetes, which is the opposite pattern of this country. Perhaps they're lazier, perhaps they have bad diets, so on and so forth. Who knows? These are just correlations. Proximity to places of worship tend to have low. I don't know what to make of this correlation, but it's a correlation that you can start to unravel. Some more. Smaller clinics, just to give you a flavor of what you can do very quickly. Smaller clinics with lower patient load tend to do better than larger ones, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah? So what do we do next with these data? Early on in the company's about 4 or 5 years old. Early on, we had created, because we realized that once you hand somebody the ability to monitor potentially life-threatening disease on a minute-by-minute frequency, it's a little bit debilitating, psychologically debilitating, to know that you can do it all the time. And we found that people are not predisposed to keep using it in the way that we would think would be an intelligent way to use the device. So we ended up creating something called the Habits Program, which is basically reality TV 101. Essentially got a bunch of actors to mimic what an Indian household with a diabetic patient would have to go through, and to train people in how you should think about the disease, think about your diet, think about exercise, and so on. That program itself is now sold all over India as a behavior modification tool, sometimes with the device, sometimes independently of the device. So from the data side, what we could do is think about ways of integrating the device and trying to induce mass behavior change. So what we've done is taken the program called the Habits Program and localized it to about 6 to 10 languages in different countries, and are starting to see it used in different ways with the device and experimenting our way to it. So on and so forth. So essentially, all this is something that fits in your pocket, that lowers the cost of testing by 1 to 2 orders of magnitude, and makes this available to the 2 billion people that need it. Thank you.